And it says in the next paragraph on page 25, and there's a solution, it says exactly, what does it say? Where therefore we approached in those in whom the problem had been solved. It's telling you here in black and white in this book. Actually, when I read it now, it's really like in color. It just opened up in like in Technicolor. When you read that, problems had been solved. So it's telling us there was nothing left for us to do but pick up the simple. The word simple here, spiritual toolkit laid at our feet. And it tells us what happens. We have found much of heaven. We've been rocketed into the fourth dimension of existence, of which we had not even dreamed, right? So we can be rocketed into that fourth dimension of existence. Pretty amazing, but it's really true. You know, a lot of times people come and how does this relate to my food addiction? It has everything to do about it. It's all related to addiction to people, food, and, you know, desire is the cause of all suffering. When you try to control everyone and everything, it talks about it many times in the big book where we want to be the director of the play or we want the Shakespearean play, and for some reason it doesn't come off very well. We're coming from the self-esteem, self-pity. You know, I talk about humility and God's esteem. And here's one thing I always say, and people always like look at me like, that's not right. I says, I don't need more self-esteem. Always say, and people gave me the wrong information, says, Bob, build up your self-esteem. Build up, you know, maybe I felt I had to be better than others, look better, dress better. Never gave me any and feel any better. It was my own thinking, my plan and designs, my own philosophy. But when I get that higher consciousness, which was, you know, the real source has really been in us all the time. We just block it out we block out that sunlight spirit. The idea of God is in every man, woman, and child and centered in this higher consciousness, which will tell you, you'll intuitively know what is it. You know, we read that all the time, 9-step promise, but the 10-step promises says, in a position of neutrality, not even have sworn off. You know, we don't even have to swear it off. Well, you know, we stop fighting anyone or anything because the reason we're fighting is coming from the selfishness, self-centered on page 62. So this whole thing, let me see if, you know, these quotes I had picked out here really. But anyway, like I said, we started out, we were talking in the beginning about these compulsions. Compulsions, right? The compulsion be liked. You know what? Even your compulsions, when we accept and appreciate and look at them and not react to them from the self, they go away because, you know, it's just like if you have an argument with somebody and you don't resist them, there can't be an argument. It takes two to tango. The same with our thoughts. When we resist them, trying to diet, trying to control it, that's where the problem comes in. And the way we know this is somebody could sit there and say, you know, that's not true at all. You know, a diet works, but no, 95% of it doesn't work and the other 5% of people are miserable. So which way you want to go with this? I have here bliss and ecstasy are our natural state. Do you realize that? God created us. We could be happy. The thing that's standing in our way is our ego, our selfishness, self-centeredness. Ego easing God out. If you get out of the self completely and lose the self through these steps, have that spiritual awakening, all your problems, it says here, will be solved. Your addictions and your people problems, resentment, anger, fear. How about jealousy, envy? What does that have to do with? It has to do with Bob, and Bob thinking, you know, Bob. When there's no more Bob, then there's no more problems. All these problems are related to the self. Well, here's one. I like the empty feeling of abstinence. Or if a person's the other way around, they like maybe more of a full feeling. But what happens when we get self-centered fear, or actually, where do you feel it sometimes? In the solar plexus, the stomach. So the stomach can't react in a normal way because you're blocking it up with all your crazy thinking. The thinking affects the autonomic nervous system. You know, so when we get centered, if your crazy thinking affects how you relate to people. You can't think straight. When you're centered, you want to give a person a hug and have love and tolerance for even your enemies, right? Think about that. We react with the self like even when a person looks at us the wrong way, we get crazy. Here, the world is in your mind. This is what we're talking about here. It's your whole mind is the way you see the world. It's really not true what you're seeing, you know. And I say, go out and enjoy the world, but realize the falseness of these senses and what it tells us and the way we take it in. The way, you know, 10 people could have 10 different opinions about something. Here's one directly related to the addictions. Get your nourishment from the air, the sunshine, nature. I call that spiritual bread. Why do people fast in these major religions and the joy they get out of that? You know, when you're making food, you're making alcohol or drugs, or your obsessive compulsions, you're in a prison of a solitary confinement. I always say a person in solitary confinement or prison is in more happiness than we are when we're in our addiction. But we could break out of it. I said, I went to a lecture and the guy sitting up there said, look, he goes, you could break out of that prison right now. But you know what? When we try to do with self-will, when we try to figure something out, it doesn't work. It says here we have a solution, a simple spiritual toolkit. The whole toolkit and the whole steps about like the major religions of the world and the philosophies of Eastern, Western philosophy is losing the self and bringing in, when you're in the self, you can't feel the vibrations around you in the universe. You can't see things and the joy and happiness that's out there and have the bliss consciousness. We're in what we call pleasure. Like take your addictions with alcohol, drugs, food, or people. It's momentary pleasure. Even with people, you might go and you might get somebody to like you, and then because if that's the way you're basing your life, then if somebody doesn't, you'll be upset. Or you think could be money, whatever coins, they say you deal in, then you find somebody with a lot more than you have, a bigger house, a bigger car. It's momentary pleasure, and I use the example, a man who climbed Mount Everest. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, and he maimed himself, got frostbite in years. He finally got to the top. He had a momentary pleasure. And when he came down, he looked on the internet. Some guys he saw climb the mountain like 7, 8 times. Or there were 7 high peaks in the world. So he was miserable. And he had to go back and again do that. And that guy at the lecture said this. He said, look, I can sit on my couch and be just as happy as that guy. Can you imagine that? It's all done. We don't have to do anything. God gave us what's called God's grace to be happy. God gave us the grace to know how to handle our life, how to handle our addictions. But when we get out of self, when we don't change our thinking, as it says here, the great fact is just this on page 25, and nothing less that we've had deep and effective spiritual experiences which have revolutionized our whole attitude towards life, towards a fellow, towards God's universe. The central factor of life today is the absolute certainty that our Creator has entered into our hearts and does what is miraculous. But there's a price that has to be paid. I love this phrase. If you go to page 14, actually, in Bill's story. So the price we have to pay is this. If you go to page 14. So here's the price, and here's how we get out of addiction. Simple. Always use the word simple. Always say this is a simple program. It's really a simple program. But Bill says not easy. A price had to be paid. So what is that price? Is that putting the $1 or $2 when you go to a meeting and put it in the basket? Is that the price you have to pay? Let's see what it says here. It meant destruction of self-centeredness. I always say this. I start a meeting a lot of times. I say, I'm a compulsion with food or an alcoholic and my problem is Bob. I always said, my problem is Bob. I never knew where the problem was. But that was my spiritual awakening. When I realized it was my thinking. When my thinking changes, the world around me changes, right? So it says here, I must turn all things to the Father of light, presides over us all. So you can look at this in a lot of different ways, because in the steps it talks God of our understanding, Father of light. We're talking about that light coming in. Not lying to yourself anymore. The truth will set you free. Seeing that there's a life out there. Not just when we come home and I would lock myself in with the alcohol, the food, and be very finite. There's an infinite Tao, the Eastern philosophy. They talk about that spiritual vibrations all around us. Nature, it could be people, and feeling that. But we get paralyzed with self-centered fear. So it talks about that here.